Okay, thank you. Yeah, and apparently there's we need a mic.
All the clergy.
Welcome back, Reverend Barber.
Hey, I'm just thinking right now.
We're so glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Cameras.
Yeah, this way. Can we ask everybody to come in?
Please gather in, everyone.
Very close, and for a while, very quiet. We need everybody, all the clergy to come behind. All clergy. All clergy. We need all the folk in the back. If you would ask people to be quiet for the next 20 minutes. Shh. Now, before we start, I want you to look at every sign that's here. If it's got anything hate, we don't want it. We don't have to use hate to deal with hate. So look at every sign, every flag. If it's got curse words on it, take it out. We don't want it. We don't use what hate uses in order to address it. If somebody comes up and starts something, you pray for them. This is a non-violent gathering. You stay focused. Love and justice have always proven to be strong. And so if somebody comes up and they curse at you, you don't have to curse. That's not who we are. That's not why we're here today. That's not why faith leaders have gathered. And so before we start, I just want to ask Miss Yara Allen to center us with a short version of a song. If we could all, if you can, join hands together, and she'll come in her own way. Everybody, shh.
Pray on just a little while longer. Pray on just a little while longer. Oh, pray on just a little while longer. I know justice is coming soon. Fight on just a little while longer. Fight on just a little while longer. Fight on just a little while longer. I know justice is coming soon, and you got to love on
humbled today to be here with the clergy in New Mexico that are joining together with the poor and other advocates in planning for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival that will convince in 2018. We're doing 15 states, 15 regionals in 25 states. Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. I'm with Repairers of the Breach, a national training organization, and a bishop with the College of Affirming and Accepting Bishops. I'm honored, I'm humbled to stand here with all of you and to be in this space. We're here for 2 days and have a mass meeting tonight. I come here to this press conference having just watched the latest press conference by Mr. Trump. And as a pastor, I first want to stop for a moment and say a human being was killed. In fact, a 32-year-old young woman, could be my daughter, I have a daughter 32 years old, who said that she went that day because of what has happened to her gay and black friends. And terrorism, white supremacist terrorism, American terrorism, killed her, or at least those perpetrating in America. 2 policemen were killed, injured, while they were in a helicopter. Many were injured and will be scarred the rest of their lives. I had a friend who was in the church that night on Friday, and she said to me when she saw the torches, children were in that church, older people, elders were in that church, the disabled were in that church, and she said it was like hell. And I said to her, they're surrounded. She said, yeah, the church. And I thought about in Wilmington when that happened in the early 1970s, that led to the Wilmington 10 crisis when white supremacists surrounded the church. I thought about how it happened during the days of Dr. King, and there were times in Selma he couldn't even leave the church. And yet today, our president, a woman is dead. 3 people are dead, many are injured, people are traumatized. And yet a man who holds the office of president was justifying white supremacy and arguing they had a permit. They had a permit. But I am convinced now, as my homeboy David Gergen, who's a Republican, who's advised presidents, he said that Mr. Trump can't deal with hate until he deals with their own hate in his heart.
Amen.
He can't challenge what he is because it's what he ran on. He ran on the policies of nationalism and hatred and racism and xenophobia. But it's not his fault alone. It's the fault of those who chose to, they heard his policies. He showed them who he was, as Maya Angelou says, when somebody shows you who they are, believe him. And yet they still embraced him and endorsed him. Politicians did. They cannot be excused. And clergy who endorsed him, even though the policies he promoted were full of hatred and racism and xenophobia, contrary to the very tenets of faith. Because hatred and racism and xenophobia and homophobia are heresies to the faith I hold true. They're heresies to the faith of Judaism, heresies to any of the great faith. And so, it is a terrible day, but it is not the only time this has happened in American history. I just want you to know, I just got an call today that the Charlottesville clergy, Liz, have invited the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, to come back to Charlottesville on Saturday after this one, I think that's the 26th, and lead a nonviolent, clergy-led nonviolent love, justice, and truth march and prayer. And then the next day to hold a major forum exposing white supremacy and nationalism. So we're going back in the grandest and greatest tradition of faith. But I released this open letter, and I want to share it with the media, and then we have 3 other speakers today, because we've got to go a little deeper in our analysis. The words of Jesus from Matthew's Gospel can help all Americans as we face the moral crisis of white supremacists and nationalists beating, killing, and intimidating fellow Americans in Charlottesville, Virginia. The Gospel says in Matthew 7:3 and 5, "Why beholdest thou the mote in thy brother's eye, but you do not consider the beam that is in your own eye? First cast out the beam in your own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote from thy brother's eye." Our political leaders, from Mr. Trump to Paul Ryan to Mitch McConnell and senior leadership, or even among the Democrats, have said they oppose the extreme violent white supremacy that killed Heather Heyer and injured dozens in Charlottesville. And we should. We should. We should hold her and her family in deep love and prayer, as well as all those emotionally and physically injured. The test, however, of any politician is the policies they pursue. And the question now is, will these same political leaders not only renounce the extreme act on this Saturday, but will they renounce the mean-spirited, race-driven, and socially violent policy agenda of white supremacy and white nationalism that precipitated and emboldened the actions and attitudes of white supremacists and nationalists? Will they stand together to embrace a moral agenda that works to reconstruct America? Because if they just denounce and condemn the extreme acts, say, I'm not that extreme, I wouldn't drive a car through somebody's crowd, but they still condone the policies, then America, we still have a problem. These are the questions we must ask of our political leaders, yea, even our clergy leaders after Charlottesville. Number one, will they issue a joint call and resolution for the dismantling of all alt-right, i.e. white nationalist, policies and the immediate termination for cause of all government personnel who promote race hatred from inside the White House and any other federal agency or state agency, including Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. White supremacy is not just about extreme acts, it's about a political agenda. Number two, will they fully reinstate voting rights, the Voting Rights Act, to stop racist voter suppression and gerrymandering? Because racist voter suppression is an agenda of white nationalism and white supremacy.
Yes, it is.
Will they acknowledge the racist voter suppression practices in 2016 and endorse the unanimous decision of the Supreme Court about racial gerrymandering? Will they stop racializing Obamacare and claiming everything Obama did is bad, following the white nationalist narrative? Will they stop racist attacks on immigrants and oppose the RAISE Act and extreme deportation policies that are tearing undocumented families apart? Will they condemn political rhetoric and policies that target the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, and the Islamic community? White nationalists, on their agenda, attack all of these things or either believe in them. Will they renounce the use of racial fear to justify the continued escalation of a war on terror and the perpetuation of a war economy of limitless growth? Will they challenge and stop Attorney General Sessions from ending affirmative action?
Amen.
Will they increase and call for support of federal investigation of unarmed blacks killed by police? Will they repent of how silent they were when Trump promoted birtherism to the delight of all white nationalists for years as he was building a racist base for his campaign? Will they clearly say white nationalists don't care about the poor and working poor of white America because they don't support living wages for the working poor and the poor, they don't support health care for the poor and the working poor, they actually support the kind of policies that would take those things away? Will President Trump and the evangelicals who have embraced him repent of the race baiting and hate baiting Trump used in his campaign and continues to use? Or will they keep silent and continue to consecrate his actions with their prayers and support? My friends, and to the media, to say you are against white supremacy without standing against the rhetoric that emboldens white supremacists and the policies they endorse reeks of a terrible ignorance or deliberate hypocrisy. First, remove the beam from your own eye. First, drain your own swamp. After Charlottesville, our nation is presented with a clear fork in the road. We must make a moral choice, not a partisan choice, but a moral choice. We can take the righteous road of repair, as we are urged to do by the realistic recommendations of the Kerner Commission following several major riots of our lodges in 1967, or we can do as we did a half century ago, follow those who would lead our nation down the road of denial and retreat. Instead of repairing the social, moral, and cultural infrastructure of God's human family, much of the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, left their founders better angels and embraced instead a divide and conquer politics of racial fear. Nixon's Southern strategy began systematically pandering to powerful white nationalist groups which were the infrastructure of the old Southern Democratic Party. We've been dealing with this a long time. Nixon, quite sensitive about his failing to achieve a majority vote in 1968, set out to add all of Wallace's voters to his columns by 1972. The strategy included inviting white nationalists who had run the Democratic county and state organization for a century of slavery and another century of segregation into the leadership of the Republican Party in the ex-slave states. This white nationalism has been employed since '68, especially in the South and certain states, Midwestern states and others. But today's Democrats are also not totally absolved in these matters.
All right.
Many Democrats refuse to name and confront policy-driven racism,
That ain't right.
and instead attempt to frame every issue in economic terms for the white, middle, and working class. This cannot continue. We cannot talk about racism only when a Charlottesville happens. We have to talk about the white nationalism and the white supremacy that is underneath and embedded in many of the policy positions. And there are times you have to name racism.
Yes.
You can't just talk about economics.
Yes.
All parties must face the political agenda of white nationalism and denounce it line by line. In fact, racism has an economic perspective. Because racism is not just bigotry. Somebody says, well, I denounce bigotry. That's not denouncing racism. Because racism is a power term. It is when you use your political and economic power to implement laws that engage in racist ways. That's what racism is. It's not about interpersonal relationship. It's about power, economic power, social power. Let's be clear. White supremacy is not now, nor has it ever been strictly a Southern sin. Now, I want to tell you something. so we can understand, the members of the media, this is an important historical note. People keep saying that these statues were built during the 1960s. That is not true. That is not true. And if you don't understand this, you miss what's going on here. 80% of these statues were erected between 1898 and 1920. 1898, the Wilmington riots, where duly elected black and white progressives were killed with Gatling guns and run out of office. And 1920, 3 years after the election of Woodrow Wilson, who brought white supremacy in the Oval Office. Now, the statue of Robert E. Lee that the extremists in Charlottesville were willing to kill for was installed during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat from New Jersey, a Democrat of that day. He played Birth of a Nation in the White House in 1916. In 1915, he ran black civil rights leaders out of his office. In 1917, this statue was commissioned to celebrate the end of Reconstruction and to celebrate that a president who sympathized with white supremacy was in the office. So when they go to Charlottesville, to that particular statue first, they are not talking about remembering so much what happened during the Civil War. They are saying we are celebrating once again because we now have a white supremacist, white nationalist sympathizer in the White House who may denounce extreme actions but will not denounce the policies that he ran on. 100 years ago this was happening. 100 years later it's happening. Racism is not a partisan or regional issue in America. It is our nation's original sin. And to condemn racism and hate while condoning the policies of white nationalism under the cover of so-called conservatism is not condemnation at all. Dr. Eddie Glaude of Princeton University reminds us in a Time article just this week. James Baldwin said it like this about America's racial sickness. These condemnations all seem a little too easy to me. No matter what their intentions are, they smack of a certain kind of sentimentality. And this sentimentality is the mark of dishonesty and the mask of cruelty. Yes. When you can denounce extremes, I'm not like the person that drove through, but you support and undergird the policies that precipitate the attitudes, and you give okay and license, and you encourage the hatred and the racism, then your so-called condemnation is the sentimentality that actually covers up your real feelings. So we know, however, there's another way. Following the nation's civil war during the Reconstruction, and again during the second Reconstruction of the 1950s and 60s, how have we always beat white supremacy? Moral leaders come together from both sides, and they come together, repent of the nation's sins, and then they engage in nonviolent protest, and they recognize that they build a movement. When Rosa Parks saw Emmett Till's death, she didn't go attack the police that killed Emmett Till and were acquitted. She attacked the system that produced him. She sat down on a bus, raised up a movement. America needs that movement once again, where people will come together across dividing lines of race and class and party to engage in our deepest moral traditions and imagine new possibilities. Now is the time for a third Reconstruction in America. Now is the time for us to have a moral movement full of love and truth. That loves a nation enough to tell it the truth. A kind of love that refuses to use hate to destroy hate. The kind of love that will put our bodies on the line and stand up for what's right. Yes. The kind of love that will point out not just extremists' white nationalism, but the policies of white nationalism, and will challenge those policies at the ballot box and in the street and in the courts until they are put to rest. I'm moving along. Our forefathers and mothers did it then. If the abolitionists could do it then, if the civil rights leaders and Cesar Chavez and Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer can do it then we can do it now.